This episode was recorded before Daryl Brooks was convicted on all counts.
So, will you have your officers come and kneel for us like you did for Black Lives Matter?
No, we're not going to participate in protest.
Will you participate in the other protests?
I wasn't there for that.
Well, your department was.
Well, I can hear right here, right now. I'm not going to participate.
Okay, but I understand.
Let's get out of the street.
Okay, let's get out of the street. Fine. But here's my thing. I understand that you maybe weren't there for that. Do you agree with that? Would you have done it if you were?
I'm not going to comment on it.
You're not going to comment?
No.
Okay, that's interesting. So you don't want to tell us whether or not you agree with the political move that your department made to have the officers kneel for essentially a movement that was, you don't see us rioting, blocking traffic, or doing anything criminal, which we have no plans to do. Yeah, your officers knelt before people that did that.
This is I Don't Speak German. I'm Jack Graham, he, him, and in this podcast I talk to my friend Daniel Harper, also he, him, who spent years tracking the far right in their safe spaces. In this show we talk about them and about the wider reactionary forces feeding them and feeding off them. Be warned, this is difficult subject matter. Content warnings always apply. And welcome back to I Don't Speak German, episode 117. And another delayed episode. Sorry about that. Mainly my fault. Again. But we're here now. So we are going to be talking about... We don't really have a title for this one because it's a bit complicated. We're hoping that a title will sort of emerge in the edit, as Daniel said to me before we started. But our original awkward title was... Recent-ish public events of the NJP, I should say, brackets probably part 1 of 2, I think.
Part 1 of N, where N is some number less than 10. But, it's kind of a newsy roundup, but it's also kind of like talking about sort of like an ongoing thing that the National Justice Party is doing and how their kind of on the ground political activism works at this point and what you can expect in your hometown if some terrible person commits a terrible crime that can be aimed at the entire African-American community.
Yeah. And that was Daniel you heard speaking, who is the other person referred to at the start in the introduction. I'm the first person. I'm the one who actually says it, and then I tell you about Daniel, and there he is. And but I think before we want to get into the episode proper, we want to do another shout out for Ina's GoFundMe, don't we, Daniel?
Yes, absolutely. We did this in our most recent Patreon subscriber episode. But we haven't done it on the main show. So we did want to just highlight that friend of the show and a dear friend of ours and someone that we, I think, both mutually respect. There is a great deal of respect, among us all. Ina Mohammed has had a personal tragedy in her family, which means that she is not able to produce episodes, not able to produce podcasts at this point. And that has kind of dug into her income, and she has an enormous financial burden that she's going on. And that is that her father, whom, if you are familiar with her podcast, Polite Conversations, his voice is the intro for Polite Conversations, was victimized in his home by apparently just kind of a random attack. And this is, ironically, thematically, sorry, I'm not trying to laugh about this, but it is like thematically resonant for what we're going to be talking about in this episode, because, this does not appear to have been any kind of, like bias crime or any kind of like racial hatred crime, but just a random attack by someone, but has had devastating personal influence on Ina's life and the life of people in her family. And she is doing a GoFundMe, and I have donated to it. And I hope that if you're listening to this, you will do so as well. So there will be a link in the show notes for sure. And just if you have a couple of dollars and you feel, any kind of empathy for us and at all, or any kind of like mutual aid, please donate. It would mean a lot to me personally.
Yes, indeed. And me too. Seconded all of that. It was that is that very distinct I don't speak German kind of laughter that you just heard.
Yeah. The awkward laughter of being like, this is the darkest timeline and it's our job to explore it, and what how am I the person who gets to be the person who talks about this, on a regular basis?
Yeah, that one.
Yeah,
that's right. That one. Yeah. Okay, so moving straight on then.
And then my cat just decides to meow into the microphone.
So, moving straight on then, I think, into the episode proper. Daniel, what do you have for us regarding the good old NJP?
Sure. So we're not going to cover who the National Justice Party is at this point. We've done a number of episodes, including the most recent one that Jack and I did together, 114. We covered, kind of the recent, some of the recent behind the paywall stuff that Jesse Dunstan was doing, talking about genocide and how it should be a justifiable conclusion. And this is sort of like a follow-on to that, and it kind of covers more, what the National Justice Party is doing in terms of its public events and what public activism by white nationalists looks like in 2022. And I want to be clear that, just to kind of put this in, just to kind of summarize slightly, this is very much a response to the after effects of the Unite the Right rally in 2017. That's the Charlottesville, August 12th, 2017 rally in which, Heather Heyer died after being run over by James Alex Fields, and who also injured 20 something people in a car attack. The after effects of that were monumental in terms of slowing down the growth of this movement, because people saw the violence was very much available to people, and it's not just we're not just doing public activism, and this became a kind of an internal war among these people. And they didn't do public activism frankly for years. You just didn't see public activism as like a tool in their toolkit. And the National Justice Party has formed in part as a way of actually doing in-person activism to get back off the internet, and they're doing it in I don't want to say a smarter way, but at least today in a very different way. They're not, making common cause with, sort of Confederate, neo-Confederate groups trying to protect statues, etc. That's not the thing that they're doing anymore. Instead, they are embracing the black crime angle, and they are using, why don't black people who commit crimes against white people, why are they not charged with hate crimes? Why are they not given the death penalty, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera? And they are using these kinds of incidents as an excuse to sort of go and make trouble in, local communities. And if one of these crimes happens in your neck of the woods, it is entirely possible that you will have the National Justice Party show up on your doorstep. And we're going to focus a lot on one incident, which is just an absolutely terrible. These crimes are always terrible. Let's not pretend that that's not true. Let's not pretend that, there is no desire in my part to defend the people who committed these crimes, or to defend this because it is being used by white nationalists to, promote a genocidal agenda. We can be adults about this and acknowledge that, these people committed terrible crimes that should not have been done, and that the causes of that are more complicated than, black people just commit crimes, and just want to kill white people. And the one that we're going to be focusing on more than any other is the Waukesha parade attack on November 21st, 2021. This occurred. This was 2 days after the verdict in the Kyle Rittenhouse trial, which becomes a talking point that these people use, is that, well, clearly this is in retaliation because Waukesha is only I think it's like an hour's drive from Kenosha, which is where Kyle Rittenhouse killed those 2 people and injured a third, and clearly this is retaliation. Clearly it's retaliation, and this becomes, sort of like part of the moment, part of the talking points, part of the propaganda. There's no evidence that this is true, and part of my reticence to produce this episode right now, I actually finished prepping this 2 or 3 weeks ago, and then we've just been delayed, and now the trial is currently ongoing, and so I feel uncomfortable talking about kind of what's happening in the moment, just because I would rather wait until the trial is done and then maybe do an episode about that. So we will be referencing some of those events, I think, but there is no evidence that is being put forward in the trial that any of this was politically motivated on Daryl Brooks's part. Daryl Brooks is the person who was in the SUV when he ran down dozens of people. I think 56 people were injured and 6 people were killed at a Christmas parade in Waukesha. And well, let's just start. There's a show called Full House that we're going to do a full episode about. And one of the things that's interesting to me is when breaking news happens while they're recording, because you get a very clear sense of where the headspace is of these people when you get to kind of listen to them kind of react in real time. And that's where we're going to start, is with episode 109 of Full House. And this starts about an hour and 39 minutes in. And this was kind of after they do a break at the first hour. They kind of come back and then do a second hour, which is usually a little bit more kind of less structured and a little bit more chatty. And this was the event. This attack had happened earlier that evening, and the news was kind of still filtering down. And I think it's worth talking about, that's where I want to start here, is just kind of talk about what the immediate response is from overt white nationalists, overt white supremacists, like Nazis, in response to this event. And so we're going to break into this from time to time and kind of pull some things out. But I think it is worth kind of playing this clip first.
It's this is, of course, by design. That's why these Jews put out this anti-white propaganda, because they want to see white people dead,
accustomed to this.
Yeah, right. Get used to it.
So our first voice there is Michael McCavitt, who is one of the founding members of the National Justice Party. The second voice is Coach Finstock, Matthew Q. Gerbert, who is the kind of the main guy who runs the Full House podcast. He's the main voice there. Again, we will do a full episode about these guys in the near future, but I am just trying to kind of identify these people. And this is, again, in the immediate response, it is well, why isn't the media talking about this obvious racial motive is sort of the angle here. And it is, well, the Jews just want us dead. That's the answer. That's their immediate response to this is, well, the Jews, they just want us dead. And so they're just propagandizing to this guy, to these quote unquote black racial terrorists who are just going to then just come and use that to mow us down in our Christmas parades. That's kind of the angle that we're getting at from these guys. And so I just wanted to kind of break in there and kind of give you a little bit of context.
Parcel, yeah,
right, exactly.
Also,
part and parcel.
Well, they know that. Well, at this point, white people aren't doing anything about it, so they can get away with it. We haven't had the white chimp out yet, so they can keep stoking those racial flames. Hey, blacks, they let Kyle Rittenhouse killed 50,000 black people and we let him off, and they're dumb enough to believe it.
Yeah.
I guarantee you these guys did it because they think Kyle Rittenhouse killed a bunch of black people. I guarantee.
We hiked up Old Rag in Virginia, brought Junior with me. Wonderful day this weekend. I'm not shifting gears whatsoever. Just white men hiking up a mountain, taking some victory photos, and then going back to a campfire to have some cold ones and tell stories. And at one point I just said, listen, at the way things are going, eventually things will get so bad that so many of us will have either snapped or have nothing left to lose, that's when it will kick off. Now, that's a little bit cope too, dear listener, like, oh, there's always one future atrocity to really make us angry, right? You risk sinking into acceptance of this, that, and the other thing, waiting for something that's so far beyond the pale that you can't sit on your hands. There was even a debate about like, oh, this is a time for banners in Wisconsin, and somebody else was like, F that, like this is not about banners, right?
So I did misspeak earlier. The second voice was one of the producers on the show. That third voice is our Matthew Q. Gerbert, Coach Finstock character, who is the main host of Full House. So what I found interesting about this, and there was a lot of, I had to cut around a lot of the, yelling the N-word and doing the actual like violent, what should be done to this person kind of posting, is that, their belief is that eventually things are going to get bad enough that the violent crime problem is going to be like that their propaganda is going to get good enough, and that the kind of collapse of American society is going to continue until there is this sort of like full-on collapse, in which case you basically get to like the day of the rope kind of idea, where all the black people, all the Jews, all the liberals, all the communists, etc., are going to be hung, and it's just going to be like white ethno state, cruising along in a convertible afterwards, and the rivers will flow with blood, but then like afterwards it's this collapsitarian narrative, right? And I think what's interesting is that Finstock is responding, Gerbert is responding to this, in which, now's the time to like drop banners. Now's the time to like propagandize. And that there are like people in his orbit. There are people in his orbit who's like, well, even like propagandizing on this is the cuck move. The real answer is to pull out your AR-15 and start shooting. Like that's the real response to this. And what I want to get across here is that this is very much in the wheelhouse of where the white nationalist movement is, in terms of like the conversations that they're having with each other. Is the collapse is almost like guaranteed in their mind at this point, is that things are too far gone. Trans people are given too much respect. Gay people are given too much respect. There is too much support for, Jews and leftist and black people, and, like bail reform, et cetera, et cetera. And the collapse is imminent. And the real answer is, is this a time to propagandize and push that along? Or at what point are like white people just going to pick up the rifles and start shooting? That's where this is headed. And this is where the whole movement is kind of leading at this point, is they're trying to kind of push things along to that collapse, in which case, at the end of which, the National Justice Party is trying to set itself up as, and then we take power through one means or another. Like there's an underpants gnomes kind of phenomenon in which, we increase the tension in the system, ? Then we take power and string up Daryl Brooks. That's the logic here, because they don't have a coherent theory of political change, except, eventually we're just going to be popular enough that we're just going to take control of things. Yeah. And, if that's your logic of politics, then like expecting a clean civil war in which, we just get to kill all the black people. I guess that makes as much sense as assuming that you're going to be able to take over the U.S. Congress by doing a bunch of events in a barn for a few years. I guess that makes sense on some level.
Yeah, so it makes exactly as much sense, I think.
Yeah. I mean, I think, we on the left just, and I think you and I disagree, a bit on, kind of our theory of political change, maybe, although I think there's a lot of, at least in my mind,
Probably not as much as, yeah.
Yeah. I think in my mind, there's a lot of I just don't know. I don't know what the real answer is. And I think that a lot of lefty political theorizing builds around this kind of well, what is the theory of political change? How, but, it's always built around this kind of idea of, we're trying to analogize to the past. We're trying to kind of build on a real political theory. And, the nature of the activism that we do, the nature of the work that we do depends on, what kind of effect we're trying to leave. And I think there's, no better example of that than, the soup on the glass pane in front of the Van Gogh painting and the immediate, suddenly this became a moment on Twitter, in which case, look, nobody knows exactly how we're going to, if we are going to crush the capitalist system and end the reliance on oil. Nobody knows exactly how that's going to work. Now, I have criticisms of that style of activism, believe me, but also it's hard to not blame a couple of 20-year-olds for going well, maybe we just need to make a big stink in front of a painting, and hopefully maybe we're going to make some change that way. But all of that conversation, all of that, sort of Twitter drama, is much more sophisticated than anything that these, the fascists are actually imagining. And all of the work that I've done in following these guys, and all of that they think that they are, talking about tactics and talking about how to, there's absolutely no material analysis that's ever actually done on this, and so they sound like overgrown children constantly whenever they talk about this stuff, because they have this complete misunderstanding of how political change works. And I will say that to their face, no problem. They're literally going out and doing in-person activism and trying to well, if we just get Daryl Brooks to get hate crime charges against him, then ethno state is around the corner. Somehow I don't think that's how that works, guys.
Maybe not.
And not to say that they don't have horrifying ends and horrifying things that can happen from that, not least that a focus on this crime, and ultimately what's happening is that the more plugged into mainstream media are kind of taking a liking to this, and are kind of using these kind of talking points to actually further increase the carceral system in the United States, and increase the prison industrial complex. That's what effect they're actually having, is they're just kind of taking those talking points and then using them, but not in a way of building the ethno state, but just in terms of continuing the status quo of what the terrible carceral system is, ultimately. And so, they're having an effect. It's just not the, you're not kicking the Jews out of the United States with this. It's just not what's happening, and again, it is this kind of darkly funny thing of anyway, I find it fascinating in that they just have no theory of political change beyond, we're just going to build a mass movement and then, ethno state. That's the answer they get,
Yeah. As you say, it's the old underpants gnome syndrome, where the middle stage is missing, and even in the can of soup over the front of the glass on the front of the Van Gogh, that's an attempt to raise awareness. Whatever you think about it, and I'm not staking a position on that, but whatever you think about it, what that is an attempt to do is raise awareness in people of the problem, so that people act on it. The public become involved. That is at its most basic level. That is what that is an attempt to do. It's an attempt out of desperation, but that's what that is an attempt to do. What these people are talking about is just kind of stoking the mother of all riots, basically, which is not the same thing.
Right, exactly. And I mean, the National Justice Party and Mike Enoch will say well, what we're trying to do is to sort of build a movement based on finding common cause with, ordinary, quote unquote, ordinary people who feel the same kind of racial anger that we do, but have no way of using it, and have no way of using it politically, because there isn't a political organization that's going to, be able to, that is willing to kind of go there. And we have to sort of they're actively rooting for the collapse of the Republican Party because they want to sort of take over for the Republican Party at a certain level. They actively root for the collapse of the Republicans. Which also I do. Yes, please. Let's get rid of the Republicans. The National Justice Party is never going to be able to, they're never going to get on a ballot in any kind of major way. There is this big missing middle, and maybe they have some secret plan that I'm not aware of. But it is just fascinating in that this is the thing that they're trying to do, and that they seem to have no understand. And that's funny because they do. These guys do have a better understanding of the history than most of the people who track this thing. And that's why I think it's worth tracking them. And that's why I think it's worth talking about them in this way, because they do have at least some kind of sense of the political history of white nationalism and white supremacy in the United States. But there is still this just lack of understanding of you're not actually oppressed, guys. Despite what you say, you're not actually being oppressed. Daryl Brooks is going to go to prison for the rest of his life. There's no question about that.
I nearly said that before. They're saying, oh, they're just doing nothing about it. They're just letting them. No, he's on trial. He's going to go to jail.
He was arrested. He was arrested within hours. The prosecution.
He was not just allowed to do it.
Is doing a very good job of going after him. And I don't know. There is this. I do have this desire to sort of talk a little bit about the ongoing trial, and maybe we'll do this because moving forward. It
reminds me a lot of what I heard back in the early days of the war on terror. Actually, people would, when the certainly in certain circles anyway, Muslims were the main, focus of ire. And you would hear all sorts of stuff about, these Muslims, they do these things you have all these honor killings, and I know the actual sociology of honor killings. Don't get on at me, guys. This is what people were saying. They do things like honor killings, and and you're not allowed to criticize it. Yes, you are. You are allowed to criticize them. You can criticize honor killings. Really?
Yeah.
You can. It's
Daryl Brooks is a piece of fucking
get in
shit.
trouble if you commit honor killing.
Daryl Brooks is a piece of shit. Don't get me wrong. I have no love lost for this man, and there is nothing that other than watching some of the trial that does not make me think this guy, complete piece of shit, no question about it. It would have been nice if if someone had recognized some of the problems going on, particularly with his relationship with his girlfriend, in which he was physically abusive to his girlfriend, many, many times. And maybe if that were taken more seriously, then,
Rachel Maddow and Chris Hayes are not on their shows defending Daryl Brooks. You guys, well, maybe not specifically these guys, I don't know, but the right generally, they defend their guys when they do shit like this.
Right, but, exactly. James Alex Fields, and there's a very clear they will still defend him as oh no, he was just running from Antifa, and so in the days after the immediate attack, and we very nearly did an episode in the very early days, because they released this, I'm going to put this in very heavy air quotes, a documentary entitled Terror in Waukesha, which was this, it's just a propaganda piece, and it's it's both terrifying in terms of it is kind of slickly well produced, but it is just completely full. And we're going to play some clips from this, so we'll get into this. But they actually got to interview Daryl Brooks while he was in jail, in the immediate aftermath, and they hyped up this thing, this before it was released. It's like, oh, we got these really great interviews, and we're just gonna like get to the bottom of how terrible all these people are, and how these are just a bunch of cucks in the kind of Republican establishment who are covering for this guy, and they didn't want to talk to us, and how the media is just covering up the obvious racial motive of this. And what they have is Daryl Brooks was a rapper, and he did some songs. He was under he had some social media stuff under the name Math Boy Fly. And they had some tweets of him, like talking about the need to, knock all them white people down, and that sort of thing. And this is, completely out of context. Like, I don't know what the context is. Maybe Daryl Brooks has this, kind of like race hatred of white people, but there's certainly no like contextual thing given, except like, he posted in support of Black Lives Matter, and some of his rap songs had violent imagery in them. Actually, Black Lives Matter is not a quote unquote anti-white organization. It is an organization that is about trying to correct the absolute problems with the police state that Black people live under in this country. And some of this gets overblown, and there are lots of problems with it as an organization and with like individual people. But a support for Black Lives Matter is not actually the same thing as a support for the National Justice Party. It's like these are not equivalent organizations, in the slightest, and but to them, like any kind of support of Black Lives Matter is an anti-white agenda, etc.
Yeah, just incriminating on its face. Yeah,
right. And this is the stuff that definitely gets fed into. You hear this from Tucker Carlson, you hear this from Jack Posobiec, you hear this from mainstream Republicans these days, and that's part of why I think this stuff is interesting, because the National Justice Party is like 5 years ahead of where the Republican Party is going to be. Like that's kind of where I think these things are going. And 5 years may be incredibly optimistic on my part. It might be like 2 years, because that seems more likely. But we're going to play some clips from this Terror in Waukesha documentary, just to kind of give you a sense of it. I've got, and we're going to play some of the, down the line here, we're going to play some of the audio that they actually got from Daryl Brooks at the time. And we're going to kind of talk through this. So I think it's worth just kind of digging into that now, if that's okay with you.
When going through Daryl Brooks' social media, it was clear to tell what kind of ideology motivated him to commit such an attack, as it was full of black supremacist rhetoric and even calls for violence against white people. Shockingly, none of this was reported in the media.
Daryl Brooks was...
Okay, so first of all, that's not true. Tucker Carlson and various other like right-wing media absolutely reported this in the media, just to be clear. But what they're going to say is like, well, they reported it after we discovered it, like after, Eric Stryker kind of was like one of the first people to sort of report on this on national-justice.com. And it was after that they wouldn't credit Eric Stryker, but then suddenly this kind of like fed into kind of the right-wing meme ecosystem, which is a sign actually that actually the media is following your ideas, guys. Like, you are having an influence on the right-wing media ecosystem. This is what you want. And then they will brag about it when it becomes, part of, when it is useful for them to brag about it and to say like, we're having this effect. But like, they have to say like, oh, the media didn't cover this. And of course, what that means is the New York Times did not call Daryl Brooks a racial terrorist. And therefore the media didn't cover this. And again, that's something that like straight down the line, ordinary operating procedure for Fox News and everyone to their right, and quite a few people to their left, to be frank, is, well, if the New York Times is not actively calling Daryl Brooks a racial terrorist, then the media is ignoring this, that's like the IDW like angle on this as well, right? Just wanted to dip in there for a second.
Freed from jail on $1,000 bail just days.
This is a clip from a local news report from Waukesha from around that time, just to be clear what we're listening to. This is part of that documentary that, it's difficult to kind of do this because we don't have a visual component, but that's what we're listening to is just kind of an extended clip from the documentary, which includes clips from local news reporting.
Before the Waukesha holiday parade.
And today we learned key details of that hearing have been lost seemingly forever. Fox 6 investigator Brian Polson in the studio to explain. Brian?
Ted and Mary, Milwaukee DA John Chisholm called the bail his office recommended for Daryl Brooks just days before the parade inappropriately low. So why did Court Commissioner Cedric Cornwall go along with it? We wanted to know, so we asked for a transcript of the hearing. And today we learned it doesn't exist.
Again, just to kind of highlight here to explain what they're doing here is they're saying, oh, there was this conspiracy among the Jews that run the media and that run both the major political parties to allow violent black people to be out to kill white people and to commit mass violence against white people and to turn a blind eye towards it. And now that it's become like a major focus, now that there is this kind of major event, everyone is covering their ass to protect the Jews from their from their obvious malfeasance on this matter. And ultimately, there's this kind of cover up happening. Now, I absolutely believe that Republican lawmakers are covering their ass on this and that the notes on that thing went missing. That's ordinary operating procedure among people with positions of power who are being held accountable. Congratulations. You have exposed that, people in power don't like to actually have their crimes exposed, and congratulations, and also the local news was reporting on this within days, this is not being hidden. This is like a local news report who are asking pertinent questions but of course they're not saying, the Jews are in control of this and, Daryl Brooks is an obvious racial terrorist and this is a full-scale white genocide attack. And therefore, they're covering up the real story. That's the angle that the documentary is kind of going for. They don't put it in exactly that many words, but that's in context. That's the implication here, right? So I'm just trying to explain what's happening, between the lines here.
Narrative the authorities concocted to explain why Brooks was allowed back out on the street was said to be a technical error or oversight. With just a little bit of research, it becomes crystal clear that his release was a desired outcome of a well-funded network of left-wing activists posing as bail reformers and bail disruptors. Among this network is DA John Chisholm, the attorney who oversaw Brooks's bail hearing. Chisholm's record shows that he lets out 65% of felons without bail or only light bail. This is most likely due to his membership in the radical left-wing NGO Measures for Justice, which is funded by Jewish billionaire George Soros through his Open Society Institute. This is just a tiny link in the chain that binds these far-left networks that supposedly aim at fighting for racial justice by letting out black violent criminals onto the street under the guise of bail reform.
I mean, do I really have to say more than I've already said in terms of that commentary? The kind of progressive DA phenomenon, it's a step in the right direction. It's ultimately not enough. It's not, you're never going to actually fix the system with a progressive DA. But I mean, this is something that, legal, left-wing legal analysts do see as a positive step. And, particularly in the wake of COVID, there was this, kind of strong, impetus to kind of keep people outside of the overcrowding of the jail system to prevent people from getting COVID, particularly before, there were vaccines widely available. That was kind of a real phenomenon, and kind of cutting the budget. And I am a prison abolitionist. I've been very open about that, and people have criticisms of that, and will use examples look, Daryl Brooks was abusive towards his girlfriend, and it is entirely possible that that is exactly the kind of person who should have been behind bars given the nature of that crime. And I think far more than, Daryl Brooks did some rap songs that were, quote unquote anti-white, and promoted violence against white people. Like, that seems much less a pertinent detail that involves that, like, maybe if someone should be in a cage, it should be him, rather than like he was abusive towards his girlfriend. And it speaks to like how like vicious misogyny is actually under policed in this system, particularly when the victims of that misogyny are poor African American women. Like that's the angle that I would go for here, is like nobody was paying attention to her pain because like, well, she's not a sympathetic victim because like, well, she's black and she's poor, and she was in some sense, involved in some kind of relationship with him. I don't know the exact details of that, but we do know that I don't remember if this ended up in the edit of my clips here or not. I don't think it did, but like one of the angles that they led to was that they would compare, like in this Terror in Waukesha documentary, they would compare the distance that Kyle Rittenhouse drove from his home to Kenosha, and then they would compare the distance that Daryl Brooks drove from his home to the parade attack, and they would say, well, he drove further to go and mow down these people, and therefore, if anybody is a racial terrorist, it's Daryl Brooks. And something that came out in the trial was his girlfriend was staying in a battered women's shelter less than a mile from the parade route, and immediately before his attack on the parade, he was violently assaulting his girlfriend. So again, like I don't say this out of like triumph of this, that like that's you but what's the real pertinent detail here? What's the real thing that we should be focusing on? I mean, it's clearly that, and I think that like police abolitionists and prison abolitionists, are very aware of this, as certainly I am, that that these communities, that African American communities, are both overpoliced and underpoliced, and that the people in these communities know who like the actual like violent people who need to be policed are, but the police system, the criminal justice system, is not paying attention to that because they're mostly victimizing people within those communities, and they're only given attention when they go outside of that community and like do property crimes against wealthy people, and so And I don't know. I think people listening to this will be very aware of this, but I think that this is the way that we need to be kind of thinking about this when we the National Justice Party and the people who want to like take advantage of these kinds of crimes are going to focus on like very narrowly on the like violent incidents of like the lurid details of these crimes and ignore any kind of context. And I think that like putting these things in context is the only way that we have any kind of like way of like really analyzing this in a more material, holistic way. And so that's kind of what I'm trying to highlight here. Sorry, I'm not really giving you a lot to respond to, I guess, because, it's kind of like, it's kind of IDSG training wheels a little bit. Like we're just kind of going over, fairly basic notions, but like this is the angle that these guys are going to be using moving forward. And I think it's important to kind of highlight this. So next clip, it's more from this Terror in Waukesha documentary. And this indicates it's about a minute long, and I'm just going to play it and then respond to it. So I'm not going to break into this at all, but the main person that we're kind of listening to, or kind of the main like quote unquote journalist, this guy, he goes by the name Spectre. His real name is Trey Garrison. He was doxxed a few years ago. Everybody, this is his real name. He was a journalist in Texas for years. He was a legitimate journalist, and he stopped kind of producing copy in about 2013, and then kind of became a very vicious far right activist and like kind of advocating for the murder of journalists and all this sort of thing. And now he is kind of respected in these far right spaces under his real name, and he is kind of using his journalistic training to push this agenda. And so this is going to be kind of like the major figure that we hear in this next clip.
Since no one responded to our calls on why the court transcripts were missing or if there was any outside interference from nonprofits, the team looked for answers by going to the officials' offices.
Oh, hey, we're trying to see a mayor. Yeah. Sean Riley? Yeah. I called, I left a couple messages, and I never heard back from you. Talking to your local crew, we're in town doing a... What's your name? Trey Garrison. Yeah, not interested. What? Why's that? I decide which interviews to do. Well, of course, but I mean, there's nothing more important. But, sir, I just wanted to find out...
Didn't want to talk.
Didn't want to talk at all, or even tell us why you didn't want to talk. Some amazing leadership here in Waukesha.
Hi there, how can I help you?
Hi, we're here to see Chief Thompson.
Okay, what's your name?
Trey Garrison. He's out of town for the next 2 days. Is that what? I'm sorry, the traffic. I couldn't hear you good.
Yeah, he's not in the office the next 2 days.
And so the point of that little segment, is to, dramatize it. They've got hidden microphones, and they're kind of sitting around in a hotel room and just recording these long conversations they're having with officials and being like, well, we're trying to get to the bottom of this obvious racial hate crime against white people. And we're just innocent journalists coming in and trying to speak to local representatives. And after their kind of immediate, public pronouncements on this thing, they did some kind of local activism, quote unquote activism, where standing in front of and making an ass of themselves and proving that they're white nationalists. And then the national media got a hold of and it's a bunch of Nazis are in Waukesha. And then it's I don't know, oh, you're Trey Garrison, oh yeah, we know who you are now, so yeah, we don't want to talk to you. And it turns out being a Nazi means that people don't want to be seen talking to you. And people doubt your journalistic verities. People doubt your ability to actually have any kind of journalistic standards, because you are very much a part of a white supremacist movement. And it turns out that Republican politicians would rather just go and put this guy in prison on their own and not have to answer to your fucking bullshit. That's just the nature of it, and it has nothing to do with them covering their asses because of some vast Jewish conspiracy to kill all white people. That's not what's happening here. This is
they don't really care why he did it. They just want they want to arrest him for doing it. That's they're not actually involved in any sort of political project one way or the other.
Right. I mean, the political
not consciously anyway.
Right. Well, the political project of continuing to jail black people continues anew. We don't care about this particular one, except that of course it's a tragedy and we're going to kind of use it in our. But all we need is to
that's the one.
He's going to be in prison for the rest of his life, regardless. There is no one. And look, I would like to also be clear that even left-wing groups, I saw no movement from the Innocence Project or the Marshall Project or any of these groups that I have enormous respect for. None of these groups came out and were we need to get this guy out of prison. This is not a sympathetic case, and this is not something anyone thinks look, this is the one we need to go to bat for. There was no one actively working get Daryl Brooks out of prison. Everybody kind of recognized, this is a horrifying crime, and if anyone deserves to be in prison, this is someone who deserves to be in jail. Everybody recognized that. And even in the kind of abolition movement, I saw maybe I missed it, but I saw nothing in my circles that anybody was giving this guy any degree of sympathy whatsoever beyond sympathy as a human being who is being locked in a cage, which again, there was no movement to get this guy out of jail. Everybody was kind of on board with, if anybody deserves to be here, it's him. Fair. And so the fact that they're, agitating for, he's not being brought up on hate crime charges, he's not going to be subject to the death penalty, et cetera, et cetera. This is kind of it's beside the point to some degree, because there is no doubt in anybody's mind what the kind of end result of this is going to be. Everybody knows where this ends, and that's he's going to be in prison for the rest of his life. And it's just, you're just checking boxes until you put him there, fundamentally. Guess it's time now. We get to listen to the voice of the man himself, Daryl Brooks. And I felt bad about including this, except that now, like, there are many, many hours of him speaking at the trial. Like, the trial is being live streamed. And so if you want to listen to Daryl Brooks speak for himself, you now have many hours of complete nonsense to wade through. I've listened to some of it. I have not listened to all of it, but like, we might talk a little bit about that at the end, but I did want to include, I think it's interesting what questions they decided to ask Daryl Brooks and what questions they did not decide to ask Daryl Brooks. So they only had a very brief period with him. They were going to come back in subsequent days, but again, after the first interview, suddenly everybody realized that this is an actual Nazi group using this to create propaganda, and did not allow them to access to the jail anymore. Imagine how that works. And of course, this is all just a conspiracy,
blatant bias
against white people. You know, white people are being kept out of the political system because, like, we, a group of neo-Nazis who might, muck up this case, are being discriminated against. The setup for this is, there was a narrative at the very beginning of this thing, like before anybody knew anything, in the immediate aftermath of the event, that there was a knife crime incident that was like in the 911 call where the parade attack happened. There was a 911 call immediately before, which indicated there was some kind of knife crime incident happening near there, and that the suspect may be fleeing that incident. And this was never really, it's just like 911 chatter effectively. But this became like part of the kind of thing that was happening in the first like few days afterwards. This seems to have not been the case at all. I don't know that there was even a validation that there was a knife crime incident. I think there were some questions about it at the trial. But this became the thing. And so, what they're trying to get at is, in this clip is, were you fleeing a knife crime incident? And the answer that he gives, spoiler alert, is absolutely not. And this becomes like their big gotcha. Like, oh no, because he wasn't fleeing a knife crime incident, he intended to kill all these people. This was a clear racial hate crime, because the two answers are either fleeing the knife crime or mass murder terror attack. There are no other options, Yeah,
and that's the binary: knife or mass murder white people.
Yeah, they were so proud of this. This was like the thing in the trailer for the Terror in Waukesha documentary, that they released like days afterwards. This bit that you're going to hear of him saying absolutely not. This was their like cliffhanger ending. Like, oh my God, clearly, because they have their heads up their fucking asses on this, So, Daryl Brooks's voice is like, there are bits of this in which he is unintelligible. There's nothing I could do about that. He's speaking through a speaker in the jail, and the audio just doesn't pick him up very well. But I did want to play this just to sort of give you a sense of like, I want to give you a sense of like how these guys approach themselves to Daryl Brooks, because while they're doing the most like vicious propaganda against this person, and regardless of how we feel about him as a person, the propaganda is like, this guy is a black racial terrorist who just wants to murder white people. They don't ask him, what's your intention to kill a bunch of white people? Of course, because then they might get some kind of answer they don't want. Instead, they are building this kind of narrative around this knife crime incident and around, some of the other kind of things that are going on. But they're like befriending this guy. And I think that's why these next two clips are very much about the way that they approach this interview, because it's very clear that they have this intention of kind of building a rapport with Daryl Brooks. And while they are outside of this documentary, outside of the, where the microphone is picking up, they are putting out absolutely vicious anti-black propaganda using him as their figurehead. They are nonetheless, befriending him or trying to kind of get in his good graces and pretending that it's someone else who is doing the terrible things to him. So that's kind of, so it is worth kind of listening to this a little bit. And then I've got a second clip where they ask about where they talk about his music and how his music is being used in the media. So we'll talk about that here in a second.
Well, I guess so. The one thing that they're saying is that you were fleeing some. Excuse me. They were saying that you were fleeing some kind of maybe a knife incident or some type of crime before the parade incident happened. I guess, is that true? Okay, so you weren't fleeing. You didn't. You weren't involved with a knife incident that morning or something.
Absolutely not.
And of course, now that we know that he was actually like assaulting his girlfriend or his ex-girlfriend, immediately beforehand, we now know that he has like very good reason to answer absolutely not. I was not involved in a violent incident before the parade attack. He has there's an added level of detail here that the people making the documentary, obviously because they had no curiosity about any of this and they're just making a propaganda piece, have no interest in this. But we can now listen to Daryl Brooks and say, like, well, he is very motivated to answer this question in a pretty deliberate way, regardless of whether there was some kind of knife incident that morning or not. Like, it's funny, like they take him 100% honestly when he says, absolutely not, I was not involved in a knife incident. Like, you think he's a fucking liar, like you have, why believe him on that? Because, well, it fits your agenda, of course,
Yeah.
So
Yeah,
of course he's 100% accurate, speaking truth to power, God's own truth in that moment. But, not in anything else he ever says, it's like, it's the things that you can twist to your agenda. Well, that's the real Daryl Brooks and not like all the other shit around him, like it's just, I mean, again, this is kind of 101 level stuff, but I think it's worth hearing it in its original context and kind of like making that part of what we're doing here. So, unless you got some comment there, I want to move right into the next clip here. And,
go right ahead.
I mean, is that being like a point of emphasis?
So this is right after they asked about the rap lyrics. They had some commentary about like, well, people were kind of talking about your rap lyrics, and did this have anything to do with what happened that day or words to that effect? And then he asked, was this something that's being made an issue of? Is that something, because he's in jail, he's been in jail, he doesn't have access to the media, he doesn't know what people are saying, and I think it's worth kind of again hearing what they say to him in the moment.
I wouldn't say so. It's just being brought up that you're a rap artist. They're kind of like showing clips of your music videos. But I don't know what exact kind of connection they're trying to make with it, or if they are. But it's definitely getting a lot of attention.
It's being brought up by us. I mean, we and the people directly connected to us in the National Justice Party, in like friends of mine are personally doing this and putting you in this light, and it's being picked up by the national media. Well, people are just kind of saying, that maybe this had something to do with your rap lyrics. I mean, I would have no understanding of who these people are, except like it's the guy like 3 feet away from me, metaphorically speaking, that guy over there, he thinks maybe this was racially motivated based on your rap lyrics. And we both get paid by the same organization, but I mean, come on, I'm just your buddy here, it's just look, journalists do slimy things. This is like the slimiest of slimy journalistic behavior around these kinds of issues, because there's just no, it's just, there's no honesty at all about their motives. It's just this complete manipulation. And I mean, like, it's just despicable behavior, right? Like, it's just like,
yeah.
just being put out in all the media and stuff. So, I mean, is there something within your music that, they could say this has something to do with?
Did you do this because you posted violent rap lyrics? Do you hate white people? That's the answer he's trying to get at, is like, he's trying to get Daryl Brooks to say, well, because I support Black Lives Matter, I just hate white people, and I mowed down all these white people because I hate white people. That's the answer they're trying to get, But of course, they're dancing around it in this like very polite kind of, just convivial way of like, well, we're just trying to get to the truth of this, and we don't have an agenda here, of course, They're
trying to draw him out. It's subtle. It's a game of cat and mouse. Come on.
Very subtle.
When you just brought it up, it was my first time even hearing about,
Hey man, we've got 30 seconds here, but I'm gonna try to come in and speak with you some more tomorrow.
And then, of course, they can't visit him again because the jail realized that these are a bunch of Nazis, and Nazis don't get access to any inmate, and certainly not a very politically fractious one. So then they don't get to come back. But I mean, it is just like, the version that they're trying to sell in this documentary of who this person is and what their motives are versus what their like clear agenda is. It's just a night and day difference. And look, context aside, they have a right to their political opinions. They have a right to their agenda, and they have a right to, to make their quote unquote art the way they want to. And I have every right to like call them complete pieces of fucking shit for it. So, that's just where we land on this is, you're clearly manipulating this guy. You're clearly manipulating your audience. Your documentary, quote unquote, is a piece of shit. It's a clear piece of propaganda. It's designed to, blame all Black people for the violent crimes of a few. And, you're just trying to promote a completely genocidal agenda using this. And you're trying to, stoke race hatred based on this, and you have no interest in actually solving these problems. You just have an interest in, getting rid of Black people from the North American continent. And and you're pieces of shit for it. Yes, congratulations. So, these guys didn't stop with. They didn't stop with
fearless investigation.
Daryl Brooks. Daryl Brooks was not the only case. This was the big one, and this is the one they were very proud of. This is the one that they did the full documentary of. But on the quote unquote success that they had in terms of kind of like getting people to their side, quote unquote, based on this, they started to travel around to various other places where these kinds of crimes happened, and
following the evidence.
Yeah, they're following the evidence where it lies, and that is, finding examples of violent crimes against white people by Black people, and then using this to rabble rouse for their ethno state, for the National Justice Party. Like that's it, and this is, it's actually, this one is, and I really want to tread carefully on this, because this is one in which there's not a lot of detail that's kind of come out in terms of the victim here. And this is one in which, this trial already happened as it happens. A man named Arthur Colley, who is an African-American man who was, I believe, homeless, who was maybe a drug addict, who, killed a 14-year-old girl over the course of many minutes. And we're going to play a clip here very shortly of someone kind of like speaking very actively in public about the details of this crime. And I would doubt that, these details, I mean, they are kind of like reveling in these details. They are kind of highlighting the details of the crime. I don't. This does not feel like a case in which like this is exaggerated. This seems like a really, really terrible crime against a 14-year-old girl. And unlike in many of these other cases, in the aftermath of this, the National Justice Party reached out to this young girl's father, and there is an article that I linked to in the show notes, and it is the father of this young girl, Jupiter Paulson, and his name is Robert Paulson, and he was quoted, "My daughter Jupiter deserves justice. Arthur Colley deserves to be punished to the fullest extent of the law. During today's hearing, it caused me great pain when I realized our system is as hateful as the man who murdered my daughter," Paulson told the forum following the court hearing. "That's why I've decided to, with the help of local pro-white advocates like Fargo Anti-White Hate Crime and Bias Reports, not only against Arthur Colley for what he did to my daughter, but also against Judge John Irby, the Cass County District Court, and every individual and institution that is currently terrorizing my family." And so Robert Paulson joined forces with the National Justice Party and gave statements to the media in which he blamed not just the man who committed the crime, but the local justice system that was, in his eyes, failing to promote, failing to kind of push as hard as it could in terms of, like bias crime, hate crime charges, death penalty charges, et cetera, et cetera. And this is, again, a terrifying, horrifying crime. Arthur Colley will spend the rest of his life in prison for this. He has already been sentenced at the time of this recording. I don't know that, well, he's been convicted. I don't know if he's been sentenced yet. I didn't look into the details of exactly where he is, but there was no question that he was guilty of this crime. There is no question that he was going to go to prison for the rest of his life. This man will never harm another, person outside of the criminal justice system ever again. Like that's just where we land on this. But now we get to go back in time and we get to listen to a man named Peter Tieft, who lives in Fargo, North Dakota, where this crime happened. And he is the local pro-white activist who is also a part of the National Justice Party. He, called them up and was like, yeah, this thing happened. And now he gets to be kind of the local man on the street. And the National Justice Party came and rallied around him. And they are trying to kind of build this extended network so that more Nazis, your local Nazi can just call up the NJP and they will come and like protest along him and then say, no, we are just here to support this local man who is, outside of our organization, who just wants to be heard by the criminal justice system that is like failing, that is acting in terroristic ways towards white people just as much as this, black criminal is doing so. Like that's sort of the angle that they're trying to get to. And I think I want to play this because I want to just play. I want you to hear like what these street protests really sound like. And Peter Tieft is very histrionic in this.
June 4th, 2021 started like any other day. Daisy Jupiter Paulson, our friend Rob's daughter, was on her way to visit her mother and grab some work clothes in the morning. Darkness still gripping some of the sky. As she skateboarded, she was stalked like prey from the shadows for God knows how long. Then the shadows came alive and Jupiter was ripped from her skateboard. For 25 grueling minutes, she was grabbed, she was beaten, her clothes were torn, she was choked and stabbed over 20 times for 25 minutes. After trying to suffocate her, her body was left on the ground to die. She was eventually brought to the hospital where she spent 4 days in a coma, alone in her mind, all by herself. Her family called out to her, but she couldn't respond. They pleaded for a miracle, but none came. For them, it was the worst 4 days of their lives. For her, an eternity had passed, isolated from the world, from her friends, from her family, and from her people. Why would anyone hate a little girl like Daisy. Her family loved her so much, and so did we.
There's no evidence that Peter Tieft or anybody else in the National Justice Party ever met Jupiter Paulson before she was brutally murdered, just to be clear. Like, her family loved her, and so did we. Like, fuck you guys. Like,
yeah.
You don't give a single solitary shit about Jupiter Paulson. And this is where I'm going to go out on a limb just a little bit here. And like, this is very uncomfortable for me because this is not normally something that I like to do. But one of the things that you heard there is that he calls her Daisy. Her given name was Daisy. She was going by the name Jupiter. Now, she was an artistic child. And one of the things that we get to do is we actually get to hear from Jupiter because after she died, a poem that she had written and her reading this poem, and she'd put some like audio behind it, surfaced. And her father played it on a local radio show as a way of like highlighting the beauty of his daughter. And certainly a grieving father, you would never, criticize him for, this is perfectly reasonable behavior, but we actually get to hear from Jupiter. And this is a poem that she wrote and read in the days before she died, before she was murdered. And it's entitled Rain. And I would like to just play that here.
I wish I was the rain because I would actually have a purpose. I wish I could douse the trees and plants to give them growth. And I wish I could make the rivers flow more smoothly. I wish I could be buried deep in the ground and provide for people, though they don't have much thought about me. I wish I could come and go unexpectedly and be free within air and ground, but I'm not. Instead, kids are upset that I ruined their plans, and others curse because they have to walk and get soaked. Some nature being unhappy because I flood the area I wanted to take care of most and ruin everything I tried to fix. I wish I was the rain so I could be free to be whoever I wanted, and free being wherever I went. I wish kids were happy to see me, and I wish construction wasn't difficult because of me, but it's not. Many people might hate the rain, and that's okay, because believe it or not, I would already be used to it.
I've listened to that poem a lot. And look, it's the work of a 14-year-old girl, and this is the only like voice that we have of her. And it would be easy to read too much into this. One of the reasons I've listened to this a lot is that the National Justice Party, of course, produced a little documentary about their quote unquote activism, and they played that poem over slow motion video of the walk where after she died, they wheeled her bed out of the through the hospital corridor, in which every person who could be in the hospital like watched her leave because they recognized the nature of this tragedy. The people in that hospital like knew how terribly she was beaten. What a terrible thing it is that a young girl like this had been murdered. And the National Justice Party, these fucking assholes, use her voice reading that poem, which as I hear it is a poem about, a great deal of like empathy and wanting to like make a better place in the world. Right. This is a young girl, a 14-year-old who, by all accounts was artistic. She was going by Jupiter instead of Daisy. She was skateboarding when she was like attacked and murdered. And she is clearly like expressing a desire for, even if people don't like me, I want to be a better force in this world. And then her father, after her murder, uses her memory to make common cause with like the worst fucking political party in the English speaking world. Right. It does not strike me that the young woman who wrote that poem and recorded it and put music under it would agree with that perspective. And look, I obviously didn't know Jupiter Paulson, and I will never know her, but yeah, I can't say any more than that. But like this strikes me as
very ill-judged, at the least. And inappropriate.
To use those words in that way.
Yeah, we can sympathize with a man in the extremity of grief, but
but then like to not highlight her life and her desire and who she was, and instead to make common cause with this like absolutely vile political group. That's the thing that we condemn in no uncertain terms. And I have my own thoughts about like possibilities about what that poem means and about who Jupiter Paulson was that I will not express on this podcast. But I've been thinking a lot about that in preparation of this episode, and I think that's all I'm going to say about that.
Yeah, I think it speaks for itself, or it should do anyway.
I got one more clip because Ethan Liming, another white man, another white person who was killed. This is a little bit more of a complicated situation because, by all accounts, he and two black friends of his came across this is in Akron, Ohio, came across a group of black people playing basketball, and fired it's not like a water gun. It's like this it shoots like these gel pellets. It has like a particular name, but it's like these kind of like, it's supposed to be like this like kind of sticky gel stuff. And apparently there's a TikTok challenge around it. And if like you freeze the gel pellets and they like hurt like paintball guns and, that sort of thing. And there are a lot of like questions about exactly kind of what happened. But apparently, these kids were off like skylarking, and Ethan Liming is a white kid. He was, like on the football team or something. He was this, very Chad looking jock, junior or senior in high school kind of guy. And they were skylarking. They came across these kids at the basketball court. They, and everybody agrees to like these details, right? That, they fired upon these guys with this, kind of water pistol and, or this like gel pistol thing. And a scuffle ensues. And at the end of it, Ethan Liming is dead. And of course this gets, because Ethan Liming is killed and not the two like black men or black kids he was with did not die, and it was three black kids.
Not how it's supposed to work. Something wrong here.
Right. This is clearly like a race bias crime. This is clearly like a hate crime against like this one kid. And our cold open is Enoch accosting a police officer, in the aftermath of this event. And the details will probably never really come out, but the initial kind of reporting was that, his chest was caved in and there were like these severe injuries in his head. And this was, this kind of like clear, violent assault against this kid. And then apparently there was some like security camera video that came out, and suddenly like the charges, they were not dropped, but they were dramatically reduced, which implies that there were some details that came out based on that security camera footage, which indicated that maybe this was not as one-sided as the initial reporting made it sound. But of course, the Nazis, the way they treat this is, this is just the system, apologizing for violent black thugs when they kill a white person. Because really what they want to do is just kill all white people. And that's what the system is meant to do at this point, because it's just white genocide. And so we're going to end on an extended clip of, Enoch, Warren Bellag, Eric Stryker, and Michael McKevitt, at the Justin for Ethan bit. And again, if one of these crimes happens in your neck of the woods, you can very much expect this to happen to some degree or another in your town. And please, if it does, do not engage with these people. Just get every bit of video you possibly can. We will continue to kind of cover some of this as it happens. And they have been doing many more of these public events, but this should give you a sense of kind of what their propaganda sounds like around this, because look, ultimately what they do is they go out to these things, they do these big public protests, and they get like 20 people interested. Some people honk their horns in support as they drive by, but the real point is to put it online and to build even though they say we're building an in-person political movement, we're doing in-person events, the online aspect of this cannot be overstated. And they're using these alternative media platforms that they've developed as a way of doing that, and they are trying to hide the sort of like the essential nature of their activism through, we're just here trying to get justice for Ethan, etc. And so they don't they're not like calling out in so many explicit words. I mean, they may hold a sign that's like the Jews did this or whatever, but it's very much more like we are pro-white advocates. We are just trying to get justice for these people, and that's what we need to expose about this, is that no, these people still are who we know they are. And I don't think they're fooling a lot of people, but I think they will still have this kind of like outsized effect in the right-wing ecosystem if they continue to kind of do these events. And that's why I think it's important to highlight it now and to kind of talk about like how this works on their end. So let's see what the propaganda sounds like.
Limey was involved in an altercation between two groups of black kids in which he was the only white kid there. He somehow managed to be the only white that ended up dead. He was beaten to death, his skull was crushed, his car was stolen so he couldn't be taken to the hospital, and all of this was done because of his race. His father was told that he fought for his life. This brave young man fought for his life.
So your first voice there was Mike Enoch, and the second voice is Warren Balog. This is an edited clips package that was part of the documentary.
Life. And what they're trying to do, what the defense attorneys are trying to do, and the judges are going to let them get away with this, is say that this was self-defense. We're not going to let this go. We're not going to forget about this. When these crimes happen, the parents are always told the same thing. Don't make it racial. Don't make an issue out of it. The system will do its job. And what happens? Every time there's an anti-white hate crime like this, it's brushed under the rug. The charges are either dropped or dismissed. And we've seen this over and over again. These black killers are declared mentally incompetent or insane.
Seems like some of our discourse may be driven by resentment. But I think that when you live in a country where you call the police and they ignore your victimization because you are a second-class citizen, right? Because you are a demonized, when not ignored, population, I think we have a right to have a little resentment about that, don't we?
Every day, the system denies white people their civil rights, the rights that we are guaranteed, the rights that we fought to secure. Every day, the media tells everybody that it's open season on white people. You will not face punishment if you hurt it.
So, there's not really much to say beyond what we've already said here in terms of that. And I think, some of that audio, I've listened to it multiple times, and I think it may be difficult to kind of gather it without the video component. I think that may be a problem that we're having here. But they're going to keep doing this, and they're continuing to do this. They're going to continue to do this as long as they get attention for it. And they are talking about kind of expanding their activism to more kind of issues of this ilk in which they can, kind of use the kind of the events of the day to push their, again, genocidal agenda. And that's something that, obviously we're very much on top of here, and we will continue to cover as it happens. And we will probably come back to this in a future episode and kind of talk more about how some of these kind of public events have happened and what kinds of techniques they use, because my God, they just sit on their fucking podcasts. They'll do these public events and then talk about like how great it was, you know. Yeah. And then there's this one girl who came up and she was fat and disgusting, and like she said this, and then I totally owned her. And that's just like, you know, they are just like overgrown children talking about this stuff, but they are overgrown children with an overt political agenda, and they have an increasing ability to express that agenda and to get attention for it. And it's important that we know exactly kind of what's happening here. And so, you know, if you start seeing this in your town, please send me a message and I'll be aware of it. So thank you.
Yeah. Right. Okay. Well, that wraps it up for this episode 117. Thanks for listening again, as always, everybody, and for being patient with us with our erratic schedule. And thanks for Daniel for preparing that presentation. And we'll see you next time. Goodbye.
Cheers.
That was I Don't Speak German. Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed the show or found it useful, please spread the word. If you want to contact me, I'm @_Jack_Graham_. Daniel is @Daniel E. Harper, and the show's Twitter is @IDSGpod. If you want to help us make the show and stay 100% editorially independent, we both have Patreons. I Don't Speak German is hosted at idon'tspeakgerman.libsyn.com, and we're also on Apple Podcasts, SoundCloud, Spotify, Stitcher, and we show up in all podcast apps. This show is associated with Eruditorum Press, where you can find more details about it. The music was by Loon the Band.